Next, former Secretary of State and Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton discusses her upcoming book, books that have influenced her, and the 2016 campaign. She spoke at the BookExpo America convention in New York City.
So now please join me in welcoming Hillary Rodham Clinton and Cheryl Strayed to BookExpo.
Hi, Hillary.
Hey, Cheryl.
We need a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or something. Which would you prefer, wine or coffee?
Let's try Chardonnay.
Yeah.
It's the time of the day.
See, one of the things I want to tell you, one of the benefits of not being the President of the United States and being a writer instead is you get to drink. So I want to start, we're going to, I have some questions from the audience, and I have some of my own, but I wanted to start with, I think, the most moving question I got from somebody in the audience, and that is, do you know how much you mean to us and how much we love you?
I am really touched by that, and let me thank you for that really kind thought, and I'm thrilled that Cheryl's here with us. She's one of my favorite authors and one of the people that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, and I have to tell you, as booksellers, I hope you know how much you mean to me, because it has been a central part of my life for as long as I can remember. Libraries and bookstores are right at the top of my favorite things to do, so thank you.
So you have been quite busy. You've got 2 books coming out in September. Let's talk about those. And let's start with It Takes a Village. So this was obviously this hugely influential book, published in 2006. And now you've decided to release it as a children's book edition. Can you talk about that? What inspired you to do that?
Well, it was published in 1996. And the reason I was motivated to do it may sound a little bit deja vu all over again, but if you remember back to those years, there were people in politics in our Congress who were making incredibly harmful proposals, saying hurtful things, and when I heard at that point Newt Gingrich say that we should take poor children away from their families and put them in orphanages, I was just beyond upset and outraged. And I had been a children's advocate. I'd worked for the Children's Defense Fund. Obviously, I was a mom. So I thought there has to be a different way of bringing people together around our common responsibilities and what it means to be part of a community. Of course you're an individual, and I say in the beginning of the book, It Takes a Village, that you know, the most important people in a child's life are the child's family, but the community also plays a very big role in providing not just education and healthcare, but law enforcement and all kinds of, you know, religious instruction, everything that goes into making up a community. So I had long been really taken by the African proverb, it takes a village. And so that's why I wrote that book, and it became a kind of, you know, password in a way to talk about what we meant by community and what our obligations were, and it became politically controversial in some circles. It was the topic of a number of speeches from the Republican National Convention in 1996, attacking me for, I never know what they're attacking me for, but long line of that, and it has stayed with me, so that's why I thought it would be time to maybe bring those concepts of community and citizenship and cooperation and support for kids into a children's book. And how lucky was I that Marla Frazee was available to do the illustrations. So it's a beautiful book, and it is something I'm really proud of.
Awesome. Well, remember when our moms would tell us when we were young, if a boy is teasing you, it means he really likes you? Maybe that's what the Republicans are doing.
Well, if that's the case, I think enough is enough.
She will go to the dance with you, okay? So you also have another book coming out on the same day. It'll be in September. What can you tell us about this book?
Well, this book is, for me, a really personal, deep experience, and I also have to say an emotional catharsis. For a long time, I've collected quotes that were inspirational or funny or in some way meaningful to me, to try to capture a thought or to buck me up when I needed it, and I've shared them with my friends over all those years, and I even had a little book that I carried them around in, and you'd have a tough time or a funny time or a quiet time, and I'd flip through them and get reminded of what they meant to me. And after the election, I was thinking, as I was going through all those quotations, how it was spurring my thoughts about the life I've led and the ups, the downs, the great opportunities, the accomplishments, the disappointments, and how during the course of the campaign, there were so many people who shared their own stories with me. And it is one of the real treasures of being out in the public eye. There's a lot that you see which is, very difficult, to be clear, that. But those moments when somebody grabs your hand, or when you're backstage and a total stranger comes up and tells you their story, or tells you that, they understand what you're going through, or they want you to know that, they're with you, like the first question today, that is incredibly meaningful to me. And so I began to go through all those quotations, and then I began to really reflect about the country and my life and really what happened in this election, and to start to put my thoughts down on paper in a way that I think is not just about me and not just about an election, but about resilience, about, getting back up when you're knocked down, because everybody is, where you find the courage to do that, and what helps you along the way. And it's, as I say, proven to be an extraordinary, very personally meaningful but painful experience. It really is painful.
So we've seen you get up many times after being knocked down. And I think this is where this first question, we first walked on stage, came from. How did you muster the strength to go on after the election? Where did you find solace? I know you've taken a lot of walks in the woods, which I love. Yes. So we were talking backstage, and Hillary doesn't yet have a title for this book she just told you about. And my suggestion is really wild. You've got the walking in the woods, you've got the hardship, you've got the resilience. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really wild. That's pretty good.
It's really pretty wild.
So if you see it in bookstores,
exactly,
it came from Cheryl.
So my question to you is about those moments when we feel we can't go on. You said that writing this book was cathartic. Tell us about that.
Well, I guess I believe that resilience is one of the great attributes and gifts that you can be given through family, through friends, through your faith, through whatever gives you that sense of purpose and courage that it takes to keep going. And I've been blessed to know so many people over the course of my life who have faced such really difficult and painful experiences, whether it was the death of a loved one, a disease they're fighting, the midst of a horrible weather condition like a hurricane. I mean, 9/11. I've seen in my own life, as well as the lives of so many whom I've been able to get to know, the most extraordinary capacity to keep going. And so I don't in any way compare myself with the really difficult, terrible times that others have gone through. I have a great friend here in the city, well, two great friends that I made after 9/11 who were grievously injured. I mean, just the most horrific burns in one case and was in an induced coma for 2 months, and the other who was struck down by part of the landing gear of one of the planes hitting the towers. And I have just been both honored and humbled to see how they have kept going. So what's happened to me happens in public in a very personal way. And what I'm trying to do in the book is to explain what it is like to try to break through barriers, knowing how hard it is, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, knowing that there's all kinds of challenges every step of the way, but to explain what I've relied on, what has given me hope and courage and resilience. And a lot of it for me is rooted in my family, rooted in my friends, because I've been really lucky in both. But a lot of it is also because I have this determination, as someone said about me the other day, a stubbornness that, you just get up every day and you do the best you can. It's literally one foot in front of the other. And when you are fighting for something larger than yourself, which is what I've always believed, that keeps you going even when you're down and nearly out personally. So this book covers a lot of that, and it covers some of the experiences that you all watched, but from my perspective as to how it felt. And it is sometimes, I'll work on it for a couple of hours. I have a little writing area in the attic of our little farmhouse. We live, about 50 minutes north of here. And, I'll work on it, and I've got, great colleagues who are doing research and helping me think through how best to present things. And it's so exhausting that I just literally have to get up, either go for a walk or go to bed. Those are my two choices.
I can relate to that, yeah. I'm curious, it's really interesting to me, because you're right. I mean, the art of memoir is about subjectivity. It's about telling the true story of what it felt like to be you in that moment. And most memoirs don't have that. That story wasn't also a public story. And you're unique in that regard. And yet one of the things that memoir demands, I think good memoir demands, that you be vulnerable, you take risks, you tell that truth, what it was you were really thinking and feeling. But as somebody who's had to be such a public person, how do you navigate that? How do you find that place of vulnerability in your work? That's my first question. My second question is, are you going there further in this next book than you've gone before because you're in a different position?
Absolutely. Well, I'm certainly going a lot further, and I think that both the experience and the choices we face in the future demand that I go as far as I can. And what you said really resonated with me. This is my truth. And people can disagree, and guess what? They will, I'm sure. But this is how I experienced being the first woman to, break that barrier, get nominated, stand on a stage for debates, deal with all of the incredibly odd, bizarre happenings that were around. And I'm very clear in that. I'm saying, look, you may think you know what happened, and you may be right to a certain extent based on what you've perceived and how you process it, but I'm going to tell you how I saw it and what I felt and what I thought, because you cannot make up what happened. And I think that's part of the reason why it's such an incredible experience trying to write it, because even I forgot some of the wacky things that were said and done, and to pull that all back out and try to be both personal but as dispassionate as possible, and to explain. And part of the motivation is not only it's good for my mental health, but I think it is also really important that we come to grips with what we need to do in the future as a country. I mean, it's a wonderful coincidence that I'm doing the children's book at the same time, because the children's book is really, in many ways, rooted in the idea of citizenship. How do we give our children the tools that they need, not only for their own lives, but to be active citizens, and how do they then cooperate with people? And so thinking about this election and all the lines that were drawn and the partisanship and everything that was flying at us, it's important for me to say, look, this is how I experienced it. And I think I don't know if you had the same experience with Wild, because, lots of people have hiked the Pacific Coast trail, but this was your truth, your experience, and part of the reason it was so powerful is you could feel that. And somebody else could hike it tomorrow and they wouldn't have the same experience, and somebody else could run for president tomorrow or in 4 years. They won't have the same experience, right? So part of what I'm trying to do...
Can somebody else please run for president tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a long tomorrow. So that's how I'm trying to convey it. And yeah, it really is as I think of it, a kind of unvarnished view of what I think happened, and putting myself into these different events, and sort of pulling the curtain back so that readers can say, well, what was it like standing on the stage debating your opponent? What was going through your head? And you will find out what was going through my head.
I think I speak for all of us when I say we cannot wait to read it. What I'm curious about, you said that sometimes you have to walk out of your shed and go for a walk or take a nap or have a glass of Chardonnay. What's the hardest? Talk to me about some challenges. What are the hardest parts for you when it comes to writing this book?
Well, really there are so many hard parts, but here's how maybe I would talk about it. One is the really painful experience of honestly understanding, what I didn't do well, or what I didn't do well enough, or what our shortcomings were, where we, missed an opportunity, where we didn't do, in retrospect, what might have worked better. And that's obviously painful, but it's a kind of pain that is part of being in politics. And, I've won races, I've lost races. I've never felt the way I feel about this. And that brings me to the second piece of it, because the more you dig and the more you understand what we're up against, and taking me out of the equation so that it's not about, okay, what happened to you? It's what happened to us. And how much more alert we need to be as a nation. And obviously, I'm particularly concerned about the role that Russia played and the very serious interference that we know they were responsible for in our most fundamental democratic act. That, in some ways, is even more painful. You know, when I ran in 2008, and I write a little bit about this, you know, losing was hard, but it was such a hard-fought contest, and I had so much respect for Barack Obama. And, you know, it wasn't fun losing, but I didn't worry about my country. And I immediately turned around and went to work to help him get elected, and then surprisingly got asked to be Secretary of State. So yes, you lose, and you know, it hurts your feelings, and you wish you had done better, and you would have liked to have won, but I didn't worry about my country. I am really worried, and I worry not just because there are partisan differences, but we're living in such an abnormal time when we look at the way that this White House is behaving about some of the biggest challenges we face, the dishonesty and fabrication, and whether you call it fake news or lies, pick your choice. It is deeply troubling. And it is also worrisome that it could cause lasting damage to our institutions. So part of what I'm writing is, okay, I'm going to talk about how it felt with what I think was in my control and what we could have done better and, you know, wish we had. But I'm also going to talk about what happened that was totally unprecedented in American history, and what are we going to do about it? How do we think about the future and our responsibilities, whatever political party or philosophy you have? You can't be all right with the idea that a foreign adversary was trying to influence the outcome of our election. And that, to me, is a big challenge that we are going to face as a country. And so I talk about that. I try to explain what happened and what that means for us, to try to arm citizens, to try to give people a simple as possible explanation that then they can go out and be active and speak up, so that, yeah, let's have our debates about everything that we argue about in politics, but that should be among us. That should be between Americans, not with, you know, somebody influencing how people were thinking and the information that they got and the conclusions that they drew and the decisions that they then made. So it's that tension between the personal disappointment, which, you know, that comes with the territory. And I said the other day, you know, I'm fine as a person, but I'm worried as an American. And that's what I'm trying to unpack and explain to people as well.
I think it's really interesting that your writing and in your career that has always been intricately bound, your experience with the experience of the world. From your very first speech, your 1969 speech at Wellesley, you were talking about the meaning of your life within the context of what was happening politically and socially and culturally. And where did that come from, that sense of, what I'm struck by as you talk about this book, and when I think about all of the books you've written, that there is no separating you from those the political realities. Where did that begin?
You know, it really does begin with my parents. You know, I had a very typical suburban 1950s upbringing. My dad was a World War II vet, a small businessman, worked hard, scraped every, you know, penny that he made from getting the, you know, business started, and then trying to make it successful so we could have a nice house and he could, you know, give us a good solid middle-class life. And my mother had a very sad and difficult life, abandoned by her parents and then literally thrown out of her grandparents' home and went to work at the age of 13 working in somebody else's home. So they had very, very different experiences. But together, they just had such a deep conviction about how lucky we were to be in this country. And even though my mother canceled out my father's vote every election, they talked about the news. You know, we talked about it at dinner. My dad would, you know, ask if we had opinions, and he would kind of grill me. So literally from the time of childhood, being an American was part of my identity. And I had great public school teachers all the way from kindergarten through high school, who also instilled in me that sense of civic responsibility and citizenship. And it may sound, you know, really old-fashioned, out of date now, but it was part of the glue that held us together as a country. And in the neighborhood that I lived in, all the fathers, you know, had served in the military during the Second World War. All the mothers stayed home. They did PTA things. They did other volunteer activities. And at a very early age, they enlisted us. You know, it was part of our responsibility to, you know, put up the lemonade stand and, you know, raise money to give to, you know, kids who were in the hospital or poor kids, you know, living somewhere in the world. It was just a very open time because the world seemed like it was out there waiting for us. And America was really coming into its own in a way that was tangible even to a child. I remember in the 5th grade, my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Krause, after Sputnik went up, marches into our 5th grade classroom and says, "We are supposed to do better in math and science because President Eisenhower wants us to." I mean, that's the kind of stuff that would happen in our classrooms. And so, okay, we're supposed to do better. And then we get to junior high and President Kennedy's there, and all of a sudden we get tested on our physical fitness because we have to be physically active in order to be good Americans. This was part of the whole ambiance of how we were raised, not just in our families, but in our schools and elsewhere. And, you know, I just always thought it was part of who I was, and it became a big part of what I cared about.
And when you were doing sit-ups for Kennedy and doing silence for Eisenhower and so forth, what were you reading? What books were you reading? What books were influential to you as you became a young woman?
Well, I got in trouble during the physical fitness part because we were supposed to jump.
You mean the broad jump? Which
yeah.
I have to this day can never.
And the vertical jump up on the side of the wall. And they kept coming around to me and they said, "Jump." I said, "I have jumped." It just never took with me.
Are you athletic in any, I mean, besides for the hiking?
I was when I was growing up. I played sports. I played softball. I played tennis. I swam and dove. And, you know, I haven't actually kept up with that for many years.
But now it's just mostly walking and hiking?
Yeah, mostly walking.
So are we going to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail this summer together?
That would be great.
Let's do it.
I would love that.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's a date.
If we go with, you know, if we go with really wild.
With really wild.
Really wild.
And we'll do a whole publicity campaign on the Pacific Crest Trail.
And we could have pop-up bookstores.
Yeah.
Right? All along the trail.
I know, yeah. Well, there'll be. I think that's a great idea. So you love.
I love reading. I've always loved reading, and well, you know, I think like a lot of young girls of my time, you know, I read every Nancy Drew book. I liked the early ones better than the later ones. I'll be honest. The idea that you know, she just seemed like such a go-getter and really smart and brave and
kind of like someone we know.
No, well, there's a lot of I heard the applause, I think, and it was like a model for me and for my friends, and that when I think back, you know, I read a lot of books when I was growing up, but that had a big impact on me because she was, you know, dare I say, a little bit of a role model. you know? And
Absolutely.
I always felt so bad because her mother had died.
Yeah.
And so, but there, I mean, she was taking care of the house, she was going to school, she was solving mysteries. I mean, really, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a real tradition in literature with young women or girls whose mothers are dead. Because their main protectors are gone, and they're forced to venture out into the world and be courageous. And I think that Nancy Drew absolutely was an inspiration to so many girls and women for that reason. My own daughter loved them too. What about in those post-election months? Do you turn to literature for consolation like so many of us do?
I do. I also turn to it for total distraction. And I've kept a record of every book I've read during my entire adulthood.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how many have you read?
I don't know. I haven't counted them. But I have one of those books that has that has
Yeah.
nothing in them,
Uh-huh.
and so I've been tracking them. And I was thinking about it the other day. After the election, I read a lot of mysteries. I am a very devoted mystery reader, but I have some favorites. I love Jacqueline Winspear and Maisie Dobbs. I love Donna Leone and Bringing Venice Alive, and I love Louise Penny. And I had the great joy a couple of months after the election of meeting Louise Penny, and I really, I just got so into her characters and her locale, Three Pines. It just made a big impression on me. And so it was really fun talking to somebody who has written this series using the same characters, always have a murder, but, use the same characters. And I just loved that. So I read a lot of mysteries, and it was very comforting because it was somebody else's problem, They had to go off and solve the murder and save the day, and I loved that.
That's wonderful. So when you're writing, I know your editor is in the room, but who is your most trusted reader, aside from your editor?
My husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does he read everything you write?
He reads a lot of what I write, and he's a very tough critic and cross-examines me on why something's in or why something's out. But he's been really, we started dating when we were in law school, and I worked my way through law school. I had a small scholarship, but then I had a lot of jobs, and I had a job editing a long paper for an international law student. And it was the first time that, he sat down with me and we talked it over, and he gave me great advice. So he has always been my closest and most critical reader.
Yeah. That's what husbands are good for.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mine too. So I wanted to go back to that Wellesley speech you gave when you were graduating. And it was full of, I would say, you pointed out the troubles in the world, but there was also a great sense of hope. And I'm curious about what you think right now. As you just mentioned, I do agree with you, and I think we're not alone in this, is that we feel like, that something different has happened in America than has happened before. And some of our very principles of our democracy are really at risk. And I'm curious about how, are you hopeful? And if the answer is yes, which I really hope it is, how do we do it? I think we're really in a pickle. And how do we move forward with less division, more kindness?
Well, I had the experience recently of really thinking hard about all of this, because you're right, I was the first student speaker at Wellesley back in 1969. And then I spoke at the Wellesley graduation last weekend. And I went back and reread the speech from 1969, and I thought hard about what I wanted to say to the graduates, but also to the broader world. And yeah, I think the bottom line is I am hopeful, but I really think hope needs to be linked to a strategy for dealing with what we are facing. And some of it is very personal acts. You mentioned kindness. I mean, you know, that is a much overlooked attribute in these days. And showing kindness, showing support for one another. I mean, I'm still just sickened by what happened in Portland with those two young men coming to the rescue of those young women who were being insulted and verbally abused by the white supremacist on the train. And when they attempted to reason with this man and to intervene, he killed them both, and he wounded a third man who tried to also speak up. I'm deeply troubled by that, and that's not the only incident that we've seen where all of a sudden it appears that there are attitudes and feelings that are bursting through the veneer of civilization. You know, we I think, have done a lot in the last centuries to deal with some of the intractable problems, not just race and sexism and ethnicity and religion, but also what's an appropriate way of treating a fellow person. One of the reasons I love living in New York is that it's just elbow to elbow with people from everywhere. And you've got to figure out how you accommodate that, how you work with that. And it really does call out a level of behavior that it should be expected of everyone. And what I saw in this election was a deliberate effort to blow the top off of that, to basically say, whatever feeling you have, whatever, resentment, however angry you might be, get out there and express it. And it's okay to, take it out on other people, verbally or physically, as we saw during the campaign. That is incredibly dangerous. That is unleashing a level of vitriol and defensiveness, hatred, that I don't think we should tolerate. As Secretary of State, I traveled the world on behalf of our country, and I did that as a senator. I did it as a first lady. I've been incredibly lucky. And I will tell you, it doesn't take much to rip off the politeness and the accommodation that really keeps diverse peoples working and living together. We saw it in Bosnia, where it was deliberately intended to inflame neighbor against neighbor. We saw it in Rwanda. I've seen it in many other places where political leaders, for their own purposes, their own power, greed, ideology, religion, whatever it might be, really light those flames. And there's always kindling there. There's always people who are nursing a grievance, who feel that they weren't treated right, who think somebody's getting ahead, who see the world as a zero-sum game. And so those thoughts were very much present in my mind as I went back to Wellesley and, tried to, say to the graduates, you're coming out of this great education you've been given at a time of a lot of turmoil, a lot of questioning. Please find your role. And something as simple as wherever you end up, go register to vote. Get involved to the point where your voice will actually be added to those with whom you agree, or even if you don't agree on everything, people of reason wanting to get together. And I told them, I think we're living at a time when there's a deliberate assault on truth and reason. And, I think the Enlightenment was a pretty good deal, and it helped to provide the intellectual and philosophical underpinnings of our founders. And I still believe that, we are the greatest, man-made invention in the history of the world. And we can't give up on that, and we can't get discouraged, and we have to figure out ways we're going to keep going.
Yeah, I think that phrase, people of reason, is one that just I hunger for now. I've never been so nostalgic for so many Republicans in my life as I am now, because I think that's what we're missing out on. So, as you know, last May, I introduced you in San Francisco at an event. And one of the things I said about you, that I think the thing that probably got the loudest applause, was I said that Hillary Clinton made the world ready for Hillary Clinton. And what I meant by that was that you, I mean, one of the reasons that you inspire me and so many others is that you always have fought really hard and blazed a trail, you know, that you really have gone places where no woman has gone before. And of course, you're standing on the shoulders of so many women who came before you. I think whenever we say she blazed her own trail, we also mean, and then the women who came before her, who got her to the place where she could even blaze that trail. And, you know, things didn't turn out the way we hoped. But one thing that's given me a sense of hope in these months since the election is that the work you did, everything you accomplished in the course of that campaign season, really will help that next woman who comes along and becomes our first woman president. Yes. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for that. And I do have a little side gig as an advice giver, and I'm not going to give you advice, unless you want it. Please. You can ask me anything.
Absolutely.
But what I would like you to do is to imagine that woman who will become our first female president. What advice do you have for her? What words do you have for her?
Read my book. Because I want her to fully understand what she's getting herself into, because it is unlike any experience she has ever had before. She might be a governor, she might be a senator, she might be
a writer.
A writer, yes. She might be a business executive, who knows what she might be. But our system in our country is the most difficult political environment in the world of any democracy to elect a leader. Why do I say that? If you look at a lot of the women who become heads of government in the UK, Chancellor Merkel in Germany, Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi, Benazir Bhutto, if you look at the names that we know well over the course of the last 50, 60 years, they often arise from a parliamentary system. And in a parliamentary system, you run in a small constituency where people actually know you, where they can evaluate you, because maybe they'll see you at the grocery store, or they've come to one of your events, or your children are in school together, whatever it might be. And then you are selected by your peers to be their leader. So again, your colleagues who are in your party in a parliament, they see, oh, you know, Cheryl, she's a great worker. She knows how to get things done. And you move up the scale. In our system, you start from scratch. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, how qualified you are. It doesn't matter. You can stand up and say, I'm going to run for president. And then you have to go out and you have to talk to the entire country, and you have to raise a lot of money, and you have to go through the gauntlet that American presidential campaigns are. Now, I think there's some benefit to that, because it is the hardest job in the world, or at least it used to be the hardest job in the world, and it and you have to be prepared for what it means to be literally brutalized. You know, the things that will be said and the way you'll be treated, it just kind of goes with the territory. And that's not that to say that, you know, men don't get harsh treatment and aren't put in the spotlight. but you are carrying the burden of the double standard, and you have to know that. And it is, in my book, I take on the issues of sexism and misogyny and talk about it, because we need to pull it out and put it in the bright light. And it may be uncomfortable for some people to read how I experienced it, what I believe about it, but I think that's a conversation we need to have. And so for this future woman candidate, it will be, I hope I'm still around, it will be my great, privilege to be able to say, okay, I'll give you my best experience, my best advice, but everybody has to find, her or his own way. And I hope that it'll be sooner instead of later.
And that she'll be progressive. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that just because you run doesn't mean you earn the vote, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up now to questions from the audience. I have a few here. Anna from Kansas City said, what is your favorite book from childhood? So Nancy Drew, but did you have one? Do you have one favorite?
Well, I've said this before, and it's interesting because I was obviously a young teenager when I read Brothers Karamazov, and I read some years ago that it was also one of Laura Bush's favorite books, and I found that coincidence really fascinating, but that was one that stuck with me and has to this day.
Okay. Martha from Silver Spring, Maryland says, what's currently on your nightstand and what's on your grandchildren's nightstand? Do they have a nightstand? Maybe not.
No, they have stacks on the floor. They have lots of books. But I just finished a terrific book that I was just totally captivated by, called Jersey Brothers by Sally Mott Freeman. And it's the story of three brothers during World War II, all of whom are in the Navy, one of whom becomes a prisoner of war in the Philippines. The other is an officer, in the fleet, working with the admirals who are waging the war in the Pacific. And the third, Admiral Mott, because he stayed in the Navy, started off in the White House as one of the naval aides to President Roosevelt. And that was, the book itself is a great read, and the author has done this amazing job of recreating dialogue that just seems so authentic. Even, she researched it for 10 years, and, as somebody who is in the midst of writing my own book, the amount of work that went into that and the imagination that she brought to it. But I had a personal connection, and that is when I was First Lady, the map room, which is what it was called when Roosevelt had all these maps on the wall, and Churchill would come to stay in the White House, and they'd come down from the residence, and Roosevelt would be in his wheelchair, and Churchill would be smoking his cigar, and they'd go into the map room. And in addition to this main character of Jersey Brothers, he talks about a young lieutenant named George Elsey. And George Elsey was one of the aides to Roosevelt as well. And the reason that was important to me is that when I became First Lady, I said, this used to be so historic, and it's kind of like a waiting room now, or a meeting room, small meeting room. I said, do you think there's anything left from the map room? And we looked and searched, and what we could find was already in archives. And then George Elsey, by that time, an elderly man, came forward and said, I did roll up some maps. And he gave us a map, and it was a map from the European theater, and we put it up above the fireplace there. So I'm reading this book totally entranced in it, and all of a sudden it's like this personal connection. So that has been at the top of my nightstand.
The magic of books. Okay. And booksellers. This one is from Lauren from Mystic, Connecticut. She says, please visit us again at Savoy Bookshop in Westerly, Rhode Island. Is Savoy in the house? All right, hi. What's the role, and this is a really important question for me, I must say, as an author. What is the role of independent booksellers in the current political culture?
Oh, it is more important than ever. As I said, I love bookstores and I love independent booksellers and the stores that so many of you, own, run, work in. And it is more important than ever. And I hope it's true what I'm reading, that independent bookstores are on a real upward trajectory. Is that true? I hope. And
Indeed, yeah.
It is really encouraging to me that so many people are going back to bookstores, that they're buying, real books that they can hold, touch, and turn the corners down, and all the things we do with our books. So we cannot have enough discussion. One of my really dear friends, Lissa Muscatine, she and her husband, Brad, own Politics and Prose in Washington, and they have not just authors' events, I know you were there once, but they have discussions now where people are concerned about healthcare or the environment. What does it mean to pull out of the Paris Accord, as we apparently are going to do, or immigration, or, what does NATO really mean? I mean, using the bookstore, the independent bookstore, as a gathering place, a community center to discuss some of these issues, and bringing an author whenever possible to be part of that. So I think that the role has always been important, but I think it's even more so now. And you had asked me about my grandchildren, and we took really seriously the advice to read to your children, and so we've been reading to Charlotte and Aiden, from the very beginning. And, Chelsea has this new wonderful book out I will plug called She Persisted, which is a children's book about American women. And so I was over there the other day, and you can't, just as a mom and as a grandmother, to see my daughter reading the book she wrote about American women to my granddaughter and my grandson, and it doesn't get any better than that. So
beautiful.
Children's books for sure.
And it just so happens that the next question from Renee in Belmore, New York, is along these lines. As you said, Chelsea just published a new book called She Persisted. And Renee wants to know if you and Chelsea have ever thought about writing a book together, maybe a book about mother and daughter relationships, or how to raise a strong feminist kid, male or female. Have the two of you discussed that at all?
No, but I will now.
That's right.
I think that's
we're gonna have a book deal by the end of the night, right?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. So another question. We sort of touched on this a bit, but specifically during the campaign, did you have any time to read, or were you just reading the news constantly?
I didn't really have a lot of time, and that's a big loss for me, because I read usually every night before I fall asleep, but I'd be so tired by the end of those long days and having to get up early in the morning. I didn't really, other than reams of briefing papers, I had this old-fashioned idea that, the policies you proposed would actually be important in governing your country. So we spent a lot of time, and I spent many nights going over, what we were going to do to, increase wages and jobs and, all of the real gutty issues that we were concerned about. But I didn't have much time for any pleasure reading.
Yeah. So Paula from San Diego wants to know, have you read John Lewis's March trilogy? Have you read it? It's amazing.
I have not read it, but I know of it very well. John's a longtime dear friend of mine.
Right. And she says, so even if you haven't read those books, certainly you know his work and his message. And Paula wants to know, how can we continue applying that vision and that message that people like John Lewis and others, spreading that kind of justice and kindness and equality, that struggle. How do we continue that struggle in these times?
That's a great question. John is the first person that I ever heard use the phrase beloved community. And it was in one of his early writings, it was in his speeches. It was really motivated by his faith, by his courageous witness as a civil rights leader and activist. And as long as I've known him, that has been what's driven him. How do we bring people together? How do we cross the divides? And I think it's pretty clear it's more important now than it has been for a long time. And part of what I'm doing in the book is trying to think through what are practical suggestions that anybody could do. Because we are very divided. We are living in separate political worlds, and the partisan divide has gotten higher and higher, deeper and deeper, and hard for people to cross over. That great book of a few years ago, The Big Sort, we live with people who believe like we do, and we listen to them, and we get into our echo chambers, and that is exacerbated by what we watch on TV, listen to on the radio, and read online. So you don't have to have a conversation with anybody who disagrees with you. And I think
You had to.
I did, yeah. And I sought them out. One of the really most poignant experiences, and I write about it, is, I went to coal country, and I sat there and I listened to the fears and the anxieties that people had. But we have to take it out of the political realm and put it into the, citizenship arena. Listen to each other, learn from each other, and do it with a sense of openness and effort to see what is motivating somebody else. Now, that doesn't mean you all of a sudden have to forget your values and your beliefs. I mean, I really think that some people are espousing horrible points of view, and they are not going to be people that I'm going to have much in common with. But the vast majority of people, they have legitimate questions and concerns on all sides of the political divide. And I think we have to find more opportunities to have those conversations and to set up, community programs to make that happen.
So you have the book coming out in September. You're going to turn 70 in October. What's the next chapter for you?
I have no idea. And I don't have any reason to have any idea. I am, going to do everything I can to support the resistance. That's going to be my
All right.
mission. And I am a congenital organizer, so I've set up a new group called Onward Together, and you can go online and learn about it. And I took my leftover campaign funding and put it into this group to help a lot of these young startups that I'm so impressed with. A lot of young people who woke up after that election and said, look, we've got to do something about this. We got to get people to register to vote. We got to get people to run for office. We have to train them. We have to go to town halls. And it's been thrilling to me because it is exactly what should be done. So I'm going to do everything I can to help grow that and support it, and especially to, find and, learn about and hopefully see win candidates, not just in the big ticket offices, but from, the ground level up. Library boards, school boards, city councils, county commissions, they are critical in this time when we're going to have to both continue to find ways to work together and make progress together and to fend off whatever, damage may be coming from Washington. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be as active as I can because, as you said, that's who I am. That's my DNA.
Well, we're out of time. I will say Hillary has left a little surprise at the door. Some things, I'm not going to say what they are, just go to the door. And I want to say thank you, Hillary, for your service to our country, for being such an inspiration to us.
Thank you, booksellers.
And we can't wait to read your book.